everyone, Kelly here, and I can't believe it is halfway through October already. I haven't filmed in over 2 weeks, I think, because we are building a workshop next to our house, and you know, I love to film outside. It's kind of hard to do that with guys pounding nails and stuff like that right next to where I'm filming, but they're finally done with the main building, and so I can film again outside. And it's a little chilly, so I'm bundled up, but it's still a sunny October fall, beautiful day. So I'm excited. And I usually do my recent reads where I only review a few at a time, but because I haven't filmed in quite a while, I actually haven't talked about like any of the books that I read in September. So I'm just going to do a September wrap up. And I actually have one series I'll talk about that I read before September, and I just hadn't had a chance to review yet. So let's get into this, because obviously it's gonna be longer than my recent reads since it's the whole month. So first I wanted to talk about the series that I reread, that I started it over the summer and read it over several months, and that is the Lunar Chronicles. So this was a reread for me. I was just in the mood to I started this kind of towards the beginning of summer, you know, pandemic had recently started, and I just wanted some comfort reads, and I just loved that series the first time, so I thought I would read it again, and I love it again. I just think it's a really comforting read. I enjoy all the characters. I love it. So I'm just gonna go through real quick and give you my ratings on each of the books. I'm not gonna talk about the plot in detail, since you know, it's very popular. If you just want the basic premise, if you don't know about it, they're all fairy tale retellings that are like sci-fi, YA, very heavy on the romance. So each one centers on a, you know, fairy tale character. So Cinder is obviously Cinderella, and so they're all like retellings, but they all link together and form one whole series. So Cinder, I ended up giving 5 stars this time, which is actually a surprise to me, because last time I gave this 4 stars. I thought it was a weaker one the first time I read it. But this time, I just really loved it, and I don't know if it's, you know, right book at the right time. This book specifically focuses more on the pandemic that is happening inside the book, which I didn't even remember that this book had a pandemic until I picked it back up, or like right before I picked it up, I was like, oh yeah, they have a disease going around that is much worse than our current situation, because if you get the disease in this book, there is no cure, like you do die, and so it's a lot more serious. But I just didn't remember it because it's not a huge part of the plot as the book goes along, really, but it is a bigger part of the first book, and I just think it was the right time to be reading it. So it hit me more what happens in the book. And yeah, I liked Cinder a lot more this time around. For some reason, I just didn't really love her the first time I read the series. She wasn't one of my favorites at all, and I loved her a lot more, so that gave this one 5 stars. Scarlet, I gave 4 stars. I still love Scarlet and her love interest and everything, but I felt like this book moved a little slower than the first one. I think it had more filler. Cress is always my favorite in this series because I love Cress and her love interest. So 5 stars, even though it's starting to get to the big books, I just love it every time. And then I, of course, read Fairest, which is the prequel that you read before you read Winter, because it talks about the evil witch, is that what she is? But like, you know, the stepmother of Winter. And I know it's an unpopular opinion, but I really love this book. I give it 4 stars because I don't think it's perfect, but I really like hearing Levana's backstory. I don't think that it's a sympathetic story. Like, I don't think the whole point is to sympathize with our villain. I think it is just interesting to hear why she is the way she is, her background with her family, how she became this big evil villain character, and what went on, and the things that she did in this book. I don't think they produce sympathy, but I do think that you learn more about the past, and I enjoy that. And then Winter has always been my least favorite in the series. And once again, it's 4 stars. I do enjoy it. I liked it better this time, I think, than the first time. The first time I just felt like it went on forever. And this time I felt a little more invested, so I liked it, but I don't think it was 5 stars because I think it could have been cut. Like, it's just really big, and I think because they're juggling, all the characters are now together. I don't think there's enough focus on Winter herself, even though this is her book, and so it's just not my favorite. And then I also this time read all the short stories. I read them in the parts where they are, like if they were about a certain character, I read it throughout, but they are all together in the collection Stars Above, and I rated that whole collection 3 stars. I think they're fun stories. If you really love the characters in the world, I think they're worthwhile reading, but if you're not like somebody that's fully invested in the world or whatever, then I don't think they're necessary, really. They're fine. So they're 3 stars. And then I also read the 2 graphic novels that take place after the books. And I do really enjoy them because they have my favorite character as the star. But they're still not like as meaty as the books. So I give both of those Wires and Nerve, and then the second one's called Wires and Nerve Gone Rogue. And I would say they're both 3 stars for me. Still enjoyable. Overall, the whole series, I still just really love. All right, so now on to the books that I read in September. So I'm just going to go in order of the way I read them, and I'm also going to tell you what they cover for the Fall Into Reading Challenge, because this is when the Fall Into Reading Challenge started, and I ended up reading 13 books that counted towards the bingo board. So like I said, we'll go in the order I read them. I read a lot of audiobooks. So the first audiobook was Project 333 by Courtney Carver. I talked about this more in a video I did where I reviewed this book, and then I also built myself a capsule wardrobe. This is a book about basically building a capsule wardrobe. Project 333 is just where this Courtney created this project where for 3 months you only wear 33 items from your wardrobe. And so I went through and picked out, I think I ended up, spoiler for that video, picking out 35 items. And so that was my capsule wardrobe that I created from this. I gave this 4 stars because I really love organization and decluttering books. It's like just my thing. I really enjoy listening to them while I'm cleaning. So if you're not somebody that enjoys those, I think you could just get all the information from her blog. But if you're like me and are obsessed with these kind of books, then I would say it was worthwhile and motivating. And the prompt for the Fall Into Reading Challenge this one fell into was nonfiction. And then I DNF'd a book, so I'm not going to talk about it very long. It was a sequel. It's called The Map From Here to There by Emery Lord, and this is a sequel of The Start of Me and You, which is a YA contemporary, very heavy on the romance, that I have read twice because I really enjoyed it. It was a 5-star book for me. It was just a super cute, but also coming-of-age story with some serious issues too, and I really enjoyed the first one. The second one, I was pushing myself to read it, and I got halfway, and I was just like, I am not enjoying this at all. Why am I still reading this? So I put it down. I just think that a lot of times contemporary books don't need a sequel. It was fine. The first book was great the way it was. It did not need to continue. And so, yeah, and it kind of felt like they destroyed a lot of the stuff from the first book, the friendships and the relationship and all that stuff, or at least it was going that way. And I just didn't enjoy it, so I didn't finish it. And then next I read Rilla of Ingleside by Ellen Montgomery. This was the last book in the Anna Green Gables series. I have been reading this as part of the analog, but I got a little behind on the analog. But I did finish the series, and this one I ended up giving 5 stars. I know some people don't really love this one because it's not really fitting the same tone as the rest of the series. It's much more serious, where the other ones are a little more fun. And this is all about Anne's youngest daughter, so it's not even really about Anne, but I enjoyed it. It's a story that is following Rilla as she's growing up and coming into being a woman during the war, during World War I, and so a lot of the war is affecting her. There's a lot of talk about the war, and I just thought I really enjoyed the serious tone, and then seeing how it was like to be a young woman growing up, falling in love and all that stuff during wartime. And so I really enjoyed it, and I put this as for the prompt of sequel in the Fall Into Reading Challenge. And then next I read The Hazelwood and Again. So I'm not going to talk about these because I talked about them in a video where I reviewed all the books for my first Try a Chapter video. So I'll link that down below, but I'll just say what I read them for the Fall Into Reading Challenge. The Hazelwood, which I gave 4 stars, was for Leaves on the cover, And then And Again, which I gave 3 stars, which was for a new author because I had never read Jessica Chiarella before. And then next, I listened to My Dear Hamilton by Stephanie Dray and Laura Kamoie. I actually don't know how to say her name. I'm sorry, but it's 2 authors, and this is a historical fiction, and that's what I used it for the Volunteer Reading Challenge, was historical fiction, all about Eliza Hamilton, who was married to Alexander Hamilton. And I buddy read this with like 3 of my friends online, and it was just so much fun buddy reading it. We did a whole like live chat afterwards where we talked about it, and we just really enjoyed reading it. And this book really like opened my eyes a lot more, like I think Hamilton the musical did, but then also this one, to a lot of the like backside of the founding fathers. And I know it's a historical fiction, so there is fiction parts, but they did a lot of research on this book. And I have to say that between the musical and this book, I really am not a fan of Thomas Jefferson anymore. And I want to read more nonfiction to like see how much was, you know, real story and all that stuff. But yeah, I think I love the musical Hamilton, and I've heard like, you know, some people criticize it for for like idealizing the founding fathers, and so people say it's not good because it's holding up these men that were, you know, slave owners and all this stuff like that. And I'm like, I don't agree with that at all. I do not think it idolizes them. I feel like if by the like several times into Hamilton, you know, you put aside the music and you really see what's going on, and I'm like, no, I don't like any of these men by the end of this movie. I love Eliza Hamilton, but I do not think that the men, I feel like they make them look human, which is what they are, that they make mistakes, they do bad things. They also did good things, obviously building the country, but like they did a lot of manipulative and bad things on the way. And I think that this historical fiction I read also, like, it was told from Eliza's point of view. So we see like the things that Alexander Hamilton did, and he and Jefferson were like on opposite sides. So obviously it's skewed from her perspective, which is why I want to read more like nonfiction. But yeah, I think that it really opened my eyes to some of the things that we are taught in the United States when we were kids is not the whole story, and there was a lot more going on. And so yeah, I'm really glad I read this. I thought it was really enjoyable, and I love Eliza Hamilton. I'll just say that. And then next, kind of go along with that theme, I ended up reading a nonfiction called Stamped: Racism, Antiracism, and You by Jason Reynolds. And that book is actually a adaptation of this book, Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi, which I haven't read this yet. I wanted to read the young adult adaptation first to kind of like make this seem less intimidating. And basically what Jason Reynolds did is he took this book and the ideas that Ibram X. Kendi talks about and condensed it down and made it more interesting for a younger audience. So it's a really short audiobook. I would highly recommend it. I think it was only like 4 hours long. And it gives like a lot of the basic points of like when racism started, how it like developed in the United States up until current time. And there was a lot of stuff that I already knew about, but then there was also like players I already knew about, people in there you know about them from history class, but you don't really know all the details because I think a lot of that is glossed over in our history classes. And it didn't feel like reading a history book. It was engaging. And so I would really highly recommend it, especially if you want to read this book and you're feeling intimidated. I'm still going to read this, but now I feel much less intimidated, more excited to read this giant like history book. But yeah, that one I read for the prompt of young adult for the Volunteer Reading Challenge. And by reading that right after Eliza Hamilton, it also, you know, made me think, are there any presidents that were good people? I know that sounds like a horrible thing to say as an American, but like he gives examples of a lot of the other presidents along the way that have made like really horrible decisions that do, you know, really badly affect people of color and especially Black Americans. And so, yeah, it was really eye-opening, and reading those back-to-back really makes me want to read more nonfiction about that topic. And then next, I finished Little House in the Big Woods by Laura Ingalls Wilder, and I was reading this with my 5-year-old as part of her homeschool. We were studying North America, and this was our read-along to kind of learn about, you know, life in America 100 or so years ago. And I don't remember ever reading this. I'm sure I read the Little House books when I was a kid, but I just didn't remember it at all. And I was worried that it would be too heavy for my 5-year-old, but she really enjoyed it. There was a lot of stuff in this that was really interesting. I ended up giving it 5 stars because the experience of reading it together was really great. There was stuff I did like censor for her because there was some like racist stuff and like especially like against Black people and against Native Americans. And I just like skipped over it when I was reading to her, and I think it's really easy to do that because the racist stuff is usually in like kind of separate from the plot. Like a lot of times the dad is doing songs and the songs involve that kind of stuff, so I just didn't read the songs out loud when they were racist. And so I think it is something you can still read to your kids and not have to include that stuff. And not saying that you should always censor that stuff out of classics, but since it wasn't integral to the plot, it wasn't like starting a big conversation with my kids, so I didn't feel like the need to include it. Later on, when she's a little older, I wouldn't necessarily censor that out and actually have like those conversations. So if your kid's older, then I think you could like have a conversation about that. The other thing that was in here a lot was hunting, and so we were able to have a conversation about guns and like the difference between a hunting rifle and a gun that's used against people and stuff like that. So there was some conversations happening with my 5-year-old. I just didn't think that this book needed to have the racial stuff in it, so I just took that stuff out. But like she loved learning about making cheese and about preserving meat and all that stuff, so we had a really good time reading this together. And for the Fall Into Reading Challenge, I put this as a book published before 2020, because obviously it was published a long time ago. And then next, I ended up listening to Head Over Heels by Hannah Orenstein, and this is a contemporary novel. And I use this for that category for the Fall Into Reading Challenge for contemporary book. And this, when you look at it and the title, you think it's a romance book, and there is romance in it, and it is a big plot point, but I wouldn't call it a romance book. I think it really is focusing on the main character and her journey and her relationship with other people in the books, but it's not necessarily about the romance. Like, I think the romance is pretty low on the priority of things in here. And I ended up giving this 4 stars because I thought it covered some interesting topics. And so what this is about a woman who, now I don't remember her name, but she was in the running to be in the Olympics. She had been training to be a gymnast her whole life, and then she gets to the Olympic trials in 2016 and gets injured. No, it wasn't 2016. It would have been the one before that, right? It was in London, so it was 2012, I believe, because I think it had been 2 Olympics ago. And so she was in the trials, got injured, and didn't end up going to the Olympics. And so her life was kind of adrift for a long time. She went to school, but like wasn't really invested in college and all that stuff because, you're working your whole life for something. So it kind of led to some depression in her life. And then at the time when we are in this novel, it is 2019, I believe. Yeah. And so she ends up moving back to her hometown because she runs out of money and is asked by a man who is teaching gymnastics at this place where she grew up and learned gymnastics, is asking her to help train a girl who is bound for the 2020 Olympics. And I feel really bad for the author of this book because she's talking specifically about the 2020 Olympics and, training for it and going to it and all that stuff. And I feel really bad because obviously when she was writing this book, she did not know that the 2020 Olympics was never going to happen, or like at least not as 2020. Yeah, so I feel really bad. Like, I don't know if that has affected the marketing of her book or the like reading of it, but I don't think it affects the way you read it. Like, obviously you just know she's talking about the next Olympics and all that stuff. So it doesn't really affect the story, but I do feel bad that, she wrote this whole book about going to the 2020 Olympics. Anyway, so she is training this girl, and it's really more about her relationship with the girl and like learning how to like move past the injury in her past and to help train a new gymnast, and also like some of the like controversies that are happening in the gymnast world nowadays with like sexual assault and things like that, and eating problems, all that. So all those issues are involved, and so I think it was a really good book, and there is a little romance, but it wasn't the focus. So if you aren't like looking for an all-out romance and you want more of a like, not necessarily coming of age because she's older, but like, you know, coming into yourself as an adult and what you're going to do for your life, I would highly recommend this one. And then I read Kindred by Octavia E. Butler, and I'm mad at myself for putting this book off for so long. I've owned this book for 2 years, and I kept having people say it was really good, and I put it off, and I just loved it. I loved her writing. This was so impactful. If you don't know what this book is, it is about a woman living in the 1970s, and she is suddenly transported back into the antebellum South in Maryland, and she keeps going back and forth, and she doesn't know why. She seems to be connected to this white boy because she saves his life the first time she's transported back, and so she's trying to figure out what's causing this phenomena, like why she keeps going back to this boy throughout his life and saving him. And, you know, obviously as a black woman in 1970s, going back to that time is not good for her, you know, her safety. And I just thought this book was so well written. Like, from the very beginning, I was hooked and attached to Dana, our main character, and part of that was because I'm not a huge fan of exposition, like a lot of like exposition and explanation towards the beginning of a book. Like when an author is just like doing a lot of world building and describing and all that stuff, it kind of makes me lose interest. Where this, you're just thrown right in. Like from the very beginning, you're just thrown into her like getting transported. No explanation, which is great because Dana has no explanation of why she's being transported into the past. And I thought it was great the way the exposition was put into the story instead of being like a dump at the beginning of explaining stuff. Like there really isn't explaining done. We are just following along just like Dana, not knowing what's going on. And I loved it. The entire time I was like attached to our main character and so worried for her safety and well-being. So it does create a lot of like anxiety and like fear, but the fact that she can create all those emotions, and yeah, the characters were so well written, like Dana and her husband and the boy that she ends up like attached to in the past, and just, yeah, there are also other characters obviously throughout, and every single one of them, yeah, I just thought they were really well written. I'm so excited to read more by this author, and I feel like bad that I didn't start reading her earlier, but yes, so good. And for the Fall Into Reading Challenge, I read this for Author of Color. And then next I read The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware. I was buddy reading this with Emily from Novelle Novels and Clint from Readers. Sorry, I always mess up his channel. I'll link them both down below. But anyways, we are buddy reading this. This is a thriller, and this is one of Ruth Ware's earlier books. I've now read all of her books except for the one I DNF'd, except for her very brand new one, which I will get to once I get the hold of the library. And this one falls in the middle for me. I ended up giving it 3 stars. I read this for the thriller prompt for the Fall Into Reading Challenge, and this is about a woman who goes on this cruise as part of her job. Like she's a writer for a travel organization, and her boss was supposed to go on this trip, but then her boss couldn't, so she sends this woman who, what's her name? Lo, that's her name, right? And so she sends Lo, short for Laura, and she is there for, I think it's the first night she's there. She hears a scream and hears a splash and thinks that she sees somebody in the water, and so she thinks somebody was pushed off the boat and killed. But then the next day when she says something to the security person, they say that there's nobody missing from the manifest or anything like that. And so this woman's like determined to find out what happened and starts investigating and all that stuff. So the reason I gave this 3 stars is not because it was like bad or anything. I was actually interested the whole time. I do like the way Ruth Ware writes. I like her audiobooks. They're all narrated by the same narrator, and so it kept my interest for the whole book. But the reason I ended up giving it 3 stars was that she kind of like doesn't let us be there for the climax of the book, which I know sounds bad, but yeah, I can't really tell you since it's the climax, but like something happens at the end and we're just told about it. Like we are not there to experience it. And it was just so kind of a letdown at the end, because it was kind of like, it was building up, stuff was happening, I was getting all excited, and then it was like, oh yeah, now we're done, and now I'm going to tell you what happened. And I didn't like that about it, so I gave it 3 stars because I think it still like was a solid, interesting read, but I didn't like the way it ended up, and not in the terms of like how it ended and like what happened, but the fact that we didn't get to see it. That's the part I don't like. And then next I read The Lost Kingdom of Bamarre by Gail, Carson, Levine. And I read this for the prompt of middle grade on the Fall into Reading Challenge board. And this was a prequel for a book that I really enjoyed, which was The Two Princesses of Bamarre. And I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. I was kind of worried about reading it because prequels aren't always known for being great, but it really didn't have much to do with the original other than just kind of like what happened a long time ago before The Two Princesses of Bamarre happened. And I really liked the messages in this one. So this is about Peregrine, who I can't even really say that she was adopted. She was taken at birth by a woman who was like a noble woman. She couldn't have a child, so she took this like servant's child. And there's reasons and all that stuff. But yeah, anyway, so she takes Peregrine and Peregrine's sister and raises Peregrine as her own daughter. So Peregrine knows that she's adopted, but she doesn't know that she was taken from her family. And then Peregrine's sister becomes like their servant, and she doesn't know that's her sister. And so she's raised this like noble woman's daughter and raised as a member of the Lotki people. Like that's the country she grown up in. But it turns out she's actually from Bamarre, which is the country that they are fighting with. And so as Peregrine gets older and kind of discovers the mysteries of her past, she is trying to figure out how to like help the Bamarre people and all that stuff. And I just thought that I don't know how to like really describe the themes of this book without giving anything away, but it just like kind of is about, it's kind of a coming of age or just coming into your bravery and your strength and all that stuff. And also becoming into who you are meant to be truly, so that even though you might be stereotyped as brave in a certain way or as a certain characteristic because of who you are or where you were born, that might not be who you really are. You might be a combination of a lot of different things. And so, yeah, I really liked it. There was a cute little romance as well. So, yeah, fun. Very similar to a lot of Gail Carson Levine's books. And I really enjoyed this one and gave it 4 stars. And then next I read The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, which I'm sure most everybody knows what this book is about. And that was its probably main downfall for me, was knowing what was going to happen. I ended up giving this 3 stars, but I think that if I had been reading it in its original time, or if somehow it wasn't so much a part of pop culture that I didn't know what was happening, that I would have given it higher, because I was really interested the whole time. I liked the writing. I liked the story. I found it interesting, but like I already knew what was happening, and it wasn't like one of those I knew where it's happening, so it still keeps my interest. But I think that he's writing this specifically with the anticipation of finding out the mystery between Jekyll and Hyde. And so it didn't have that really effect on me, the anticipation. And so I gave it 3 stars because I thought it was well written, probably was amazing in its day before it became such a part of pulp culture. And I'm glad I read it, but it wasn't like a new favorite classic for me because I think it lost some of its impact based on that. But I still recommend it as it's interesting to know the original story in its entirety, not just like the like reveal, basically. And for the Fall Into Reading Challenge, I read this for the prompt of a classic. And now we are finally at the last book. This is why I do recent read videos instead of wrap-ups, because I read so many books in a month and it takes me so long to get through them. So I apologize, this is probably a long video. And the last one I want to talk about is One to Watch by Kate Stayman-London. And I read this for the prompt of a standalone in the 2020 Read Challenge. So I ended up reading 13 books for that challenge. So I'm very excited. If you want to see my board, this is what it looks like at this point. So, and I obviously have filled in some more in October. So I'm making good progress. So anyways, back to One to Watch. This one has been around a lot lately, so you might know what it is. It's a contemporary about a woman who she loves this like bachelorette type show called, I think it's called The Main Squeeze. But the problem is, the diversity doesn't really exist in the show. And one night she just like complains on Twitter or whatever about the fact that there's never a plus size character or never like people that just look like normal average people, and about the diversity and all that stuff. So and she has a really big following because she has like a fashion blog and all that. And so the producers see this and decide to make her the next main squeeze to like kind of, you know, show that they're being more diverse and all that stuff. So she's the first plus size bachelorette, basically. And I thought this was fun to read. Like, if you like, I haven't watched I can't really say I like The Bachelor, Bachelorette because I haven't watched it in years, but I have a lot of nostalgia around it because I watched it a lot back in college and like right after college, like that time when I was in my like 20s. I haven't watched it in probably 10 years at least, but I used to enjoy it. And so like, it's very familiar, the format, and so I found it entertaining. It also talks about a lot of like issues that need to be brought up. The mainstream media doesn't include people that look like the broad spectrum of what real people look like. So I liked that she was bringing up those topics. There were some parts that were really hard to read because, you know, sometimes people were really mean to her and all that stuff. But overall, I just found it a fun, enjoyable read. I wasn't really invested in the like romance of the book or anything like that. Like, I thought it was fine, but it wasn't like, it's not going to become like a new favorite romance, but as just a story in general, I found it entertaining and fun, so I ended up giving it 4 stars. So that's it. Those are the 13 books that I read in September, plus the series that I read before that, the Lunar Chronicles. So overall, I enjoyed a lot of these books. I had a lot of fun and learned a lot from some of them. So yeah, if you want to talk about any of these down below, I'd love to hear from you. And if you're participating in the Fall Reading Challenge, let me know how you're doing. So I ended up reading 13 from the board in September, so I'm almost are at halfway there by the end of this month. All right, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.